thank you for that kind introduction, Kim. Thank you.
Well, Premier, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much for coming.
Great to be here, Bill.
So much to talk about. We're supposed to sing a duet. Shall we pick up our microphones and get in tune?
There we go.
Thanks, Tammy. Proximity, we're on all the time, I guess.
Yeah.
So let's start with sort of the big picture level set. It was a year in June since you formed a government. A few months since then. Ups and downs, highs and lows, anything you're particularly proud of, any challenges that you want to highlight for the group?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here, and I want to thank all the guests for coming. There's a tremendous amount of accomplishments that our team were able to get across the finish line, as we say, and I'd like to introduce some of our team members for a minute. Vic Fideli, great Minister of Economic Development. Best salesperson you could ask for, and the other great salespeople, if you could just stand over there, Nina Tangri, Stan Cho, and Michael Parker. You know, that's what makes a team great, are the people part of it. And I've been in politics for about 30 years, and I know, Peter, you might have exception to this, because Peter came from an all-star team as well, with Mike Harris and Stephen Harper. Incredible team, but I think we have one of the best teams I've ever seen in Ontario politics, and we're very grateful for that. So we just let's roll back for a year and like 4 months, a year and 5 months ago. We came into office, and we had a clear mandate from the people to make sure that we put the province on the right financial footings. And when we went in there, none of us knew exactly what sort of debt, what sort of deficit we were facing, and Vic did an incredible job there. Found out that we had a $15 billion deficit, we had $347 billion debt, which is the largest debt, sub-sovereign debt in the entire world. And you think of Ontario, you think the largest debt in the entire world. We're paying $13.3 billion a year in interest, that's $1.5 million an hour. $36 million a day. You sit back and, you look at it, the fourth largest line item on our budget. Just think what we could do with the $13 billion. So we got down to work, and we were able, through Vic's great leadership, bring the deficit down $3.3 billion, down to $11.7 billion. And through hard work that Vic and our team did, we were able to even pay the debt down by approximately, was it $4 billion, just by refinancing and just going around and finding better ways of structuring our financing. In the first year, we had to move quick. The province was in a financial disaster right across the board in every single ministry, and we got to work right away. We passed 21 pieces of legislation. And maybe to the average person that isn't down there, Peter, the average, the average party that goes in there takes power. What is it? Maybe 4 or 5 pieces the first year. We passed 21 pieces of legislation, sat longer than any government in recent memory. Like over 30 years, we were, running like rented meals, as I say, around the clock and throughout the summer. And we got a lot of important items through, telling the world that Ontario is open for business, open for jobs, putting money back into businesses' pockets. They're reinvesting it, which I'll get into further down the line there. But we're able to get a tremendous amount of things done. Our biggest accomplishment, people ask you, what is the biggest accomplishment? And you could ask our team. There's probably 2 or 3 big ones. The biggest is under the Liberal government, under Kathleen Wynne, we lost 300,000 manufacturing jobs. That's 300,000 families that found it really tough to put food on the table, pay their bills, pay rent or their mortgage. Since we've come into office, and these are staggering figures, more than any state, any province, we've created the environment for 272,000 new jobs, private sector jobs. And I always say we create the environment, because government doesn't create jobs. If government starts creating jobs, we're all in trouble. But we created the environment by making sure that We cut red tape and regulations, which I'm sure we'll get into later, making sure we have a pro-business government in place, lowering taxes, giving incentives to companies to come here. I've never seen it more competitive in my entire life than it is right now for attracting companies. We aren't competing against the people down the street any longer. We're competing against the Ohio's, the Illinois, the Michigans, New York State, Quebec. We're competing against, and we weren't competitive at the time. Now we're competitive, but we always look at continuous improvement. I come from a Lean Six Sigma background, and it's continuous improvement, and we're continuously looking at ways of driving efficiencies. I don't call them cuts, I call them efficiencies, because in reality, if you listen to the news, you'd think the world's coming to an end, cut, cut, cut. Well, that's not the fact. We're actually putting $1.3 billion more into healthcare than the previous government. We're putting $700 million more into education than the previous government. And we're putting $5 billion of tax incentives to businesses, not to mention $1 billion tax reduction to the poorest people in this province to try to give them a hand up.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, you've taken us through the fiscal landscape. I'll just mention also the cleaning up of the books. We have our own report card, and Ontario has moved well up the league tables from where it was, so that's a terrific step forward. You mentioned the regulatory side, and that's a battle of quarter inches if ever there was one sometimes. Can you give us a sense of how that's going? Because at a high level, there's a lot of buy-in. I know, and people in this room, I'm sure, wish you all the best as you tackle that. How are you finding that?
Well, we're doing really well. Todd Smith is looking through. I'm sorry, I'm getting the ministers mixed up. That was yours, Vic. But we're looking at areas to cut regulations, but there's only so much that when they have 300, these are staggering numbers too. We go into office, how many regs are there? 375,000 regulations in Ontario. And you sit back and you wonder, how can someone do business with 375,000 regulations? So we started right away. Our goal was to reduce 25% of them by 2020, which is around the corner. But what we need your help, an insurance bureau, in specific, in all industries. Tell us the regulations. There's so many regulations. We call it the regulation SWAT team, a group of MPPs that all they do is look at unnecessary regulations, duplication, and there's a tremendous amount of duplication between the province and the federal government, and we're going to hit our target. But we need the industry out there to feed them to us. No matter if it's the insurance industry, the automotive industry, healthcare industry. It makes life a lot easier. And when you cut red tape and regulations, it's even better than a tax cut. Even though we're doing both, we're really focused on making life a lot easier for people to do business here in Ontario.
Good. Well, thank you. Now, to something else you mentioned, competing with the Americans. They're our closest trading partner. They haven't been that easy to get along with lately. You've been south of the border recently with some of your provincial colleagues. How are you seeing that situation, both in terms of how well we can work with the Americans to the extent they're willing to work with us, and how we can enhance our competitive edge?
Well, on Ontario loan bill, if we were a standalone country, and I shouldn't even be saying that after this election. You see how divisive but if we were,
that was my next question.
If we were a standalone country, we would be the United States' third largest trading partner. We do $390 billion two-way trade every single year. We're responsible for 9 million Americans, their jobs down south. We're the #1 trading partner to 19 states. We're their #1 customer, and we're #2 to 9 other states. So if you look at it, 28 states rely on trading with Canada, and I just feel right now, we aren't. They're concerned about China, they're concerned about India, they're concerned about other regions of the world. And I say this very respectfully. We aren't China, we aren't India. We're Ontario. We're their closest trading partner, and $1 billion a day goes across the border. more than 1 billion actually, a day. And you know, we have the old saying, U.S. sneezes, we catch a cold. We're connected. Well, you see what happens in the automotive industry. GM goes on strike down in the States, and all the parts companies and GM up here have to close their doors temporarily until they get back on their footings. A car can go back and forth parts 8 times across the border before it gets assembled in one of our automotive plants. And by the way, we're the #1 automotive manufacturer in North America. We produce over 2 million cars a year. Right here in Ontario, there's no region in the United States that produces more cars than what we do.
I hope you don't mind if I switch topics to something that drove me crazy during the federal election campaign, and that was housing. The federal government doesn't build a lot of housing, and what they do try to support doesn't necessarily work out all that well. So much of the action is here at the provincial level, the municipal level. That's a big area of focus for your government, and everybody cares about it. Could you, if I could get you to expand on that a little, what you're doing in that area and what you're seeing by way of results?
Did you want me to expand on how frustrated you were during the federal election or me? Anyways,
I can cover that. But
so, you know, everyone talks about affordable housing, which is really important. I talk about affordable ownership. There's a difference. You give someone ownership, you see some of the rents out there, and maybe some of the people in the room are paying $2,500 a month and renting a condo. You could own a condo, pay a mortgage for $2,500 a month. We're rolling out a plan over the next little while, so stay tuned on how people can afford to get into ownership and having the government backstop it. Because if you just continuously build affordable housing, or let's use Toronto Community Housing, for example. We have thousands of units that are sitting empty because of the backlog and state of good repair. And I always believe that we should take care of the backlog first before we start looking at building new apartments or condos to house people, but give them the opportunity to own their own home, and they'll take care of it. And over a 20-year period, they could have full ownership, and I just think it would work out a lot better. We looked at the OMB and the LPATs. Everyone's heard about the LPATs. There's over 100,000 units on hold right now for these developers waiting to get approval. There was such a backlog. And that's just, by the way, when I say 100,000, that's just Toronto. That's not mentioning the 905 area. So there's 3 years of construction sitting there just on Toronto. So we hired more people to run through the LPAT process and really just get the shovels in the ground and cut out all the nonsense. There was a lot of issues that they were holding up these applications for. I'm not too sure why, but again, I always point to Peter. Peter, you're an expert in this area. He probably has more clients than anyone when it comes to the LPATs, and we just have to get it moving. And we're going to unleash the contractors and let them start developing. Look how excited Silvio de Gasperis is over there. He's just ear-to-ear smile when I say that.
Well, it's one of the areas where your background, your deep background in municipal issues is really an advantage. And the other one, speaking of shovels in the ground, is transit.
Yes.
The other high-profile one. So there's a lot of action there, but not as much as you'd like to see. I mean, there's a lot of great, big projects that we're now feeling are closer. So please tell us how you're seeing that and where you're hoping to go.
Well, we're working, being very collaborative with all 3 levels of government. Everyone has signed on. And I have to acknowledge Michael Lindsay. Where are you? Michael, right there. Absolute all-star, heading up the transit team with Minister Mulroney and Minister Surma. They did a great job. They were able to bring the city on board. And we're building a regional transit system rather than a Toronto-based transit system. And there's 4 lines. The Ontario line that will be running from Ontario Place Exhibition all the way up to the Ontario Science Centre. That's our crown jewel that everyone signed on to, along with the extension of the Scarborough subway. You know, something my heart breaks for the folks in Scarborough. There's 650,000 people that have 2.5 subway stops. and they've been ignored for years after years. Now we're finally giving them a subway, and we can extend that subway. And then the Eglinton West Corridor, going from Mount Dennis all the way out to the airport. The airport's working well with us. They need a transit system to go right in there. And then the Young extension that goes north up towards Richmond Hill. And we're finally going to be able to be proud of a transit system that we look at the map, and we all grew up in Toronto. You go on the subway and you see those two lines, and then you go to New York or London or Chicago and you see something else. But we're going full steam ahead. We want to get the shovels in the ground, because all you've heard for years in Toronto, for decades actually, a bunch of talk and there's no action. There's action happening now with the leadership of Phil Verster over at Metrolinx. I'll tell you, he's a real crackerjack. No nonsense. Michael, he gets things going, doesn't he? Yeah. But so we're getting shovels in the ground.
Terrific. We're all looking forward to that, and maybe we'll go to the room for questions shortly. But there's one sort of big area that we should touch on first. You mentioned the people. This area is attracting a lot of talent. Other parts of the province, perhaps not experiencing the same kind of dynamism. And many people are worried about technological change. Does the workforce have the skills today and tomorrow? It's a big portfolio, a lot to deal with, but I know you've got some thoughts in that area, and we'd love to have them.
We do, actually. First of all, our best asset are our people. We have the brightest, smartest people in the entire world. And I'm not even being biased. I truly believe the talent we have, and when I talk to these companies, that's what I sell. 68% of adults have post-secondary education, which is one of the highest in the world, over 68% of adults. But again, we want to attract businesses and tell them we have the talent and the style of the lifestyle. That's so important. One of the big financial institutions came to us and said, this is how important quality of life is to companies for their employees, that they're going to move 2,000 people making over $200,000 from London, New York, and LA, just because of affordability alone. And they're going to hopefully land here in Toronto or the GTA, or possibly Calgary and possibly Montreal. But I think we're going to win this one. Like every company we've talked to, we seem to be fortunate enough to win their confidence and open up here in Ontario.
Very good. Well, you got a new session of the legislature coming up. So just before we go to the room, any thoughts about, your priorities, what you're looking to see, how you're feeling about it? We got a new federal government. You got interesting colleagues to work with across the country, various shades of blue. Quite a canvas to paint on.
Is it ever? But we want to make sure that we work with any government that wants to tell the world that we're open for business and to cut regulations and not put burdens onto people. Not to put a carbon tax, which in my opinion is the worst tax you could ever face. It makes things unaffordable. It's driving up gas, making our companies uncompetitive. When we're trying to compete against companies in Ohio or New York State or that environment, we can't say, come to Ontario, and by the way, you're going to get dinged on a tax and every employee is going to be dinged every time they go shopping. That's unacceptable. So we're going to continue focusing on making sure that life is affordable here, that we can continue attracting businesses, that they can thrive and prosper and grow in this province. Because I always say when companies thrive, prosper, and grow, the people thrive, prosper, and grow. And we put incentives out there on, I'll give you an example. It used to really drive me crazy. We have a facility in Chicago, one in Toronto. We'd buy a new piece of equipment, we'd be able to accelerate the write-off immediately. In Canada, Ontario, we couldn't do that. Now we can do it. That's $3.8 billion of initiative for people to invest in capital equipment. They'll be able to write it off immediately. We've given overall $5 billion of tax incentives for companies to come here and put their roots down and grow. When I travel around, And I met with 24 governors. I spent a lot of time in Chicago, traveled to 46 states. No state or province is as diverse as Ontario is. No matter if you look at the pharmaceutical sector, the insurance sector, the mining sector, one of the largest in the world, banking sector, I think #2 next to New York. We can produce anything from trains, planes, automobiles, and everything in between. Even though I was in politics for years, you don't realize until you start traveling around and see the quality of companies and people we have. Sorry.
It's easy to get choked up on the quality of people.
There.
Good. So thanks very much. So we will go to the room. We'll do the traditional one hand gets you on the speakers list. Sometimes we allow two-handed interventions, but the only person who can do the two-handed intervention to interrupt the flow, other than your fellow cabinet minister Vic Fideli, is Ben Dacus, who we were very glad
guy.
To get back. But I gather he did great work for you, as he does for us. So Ben,
These guys are great too. You see the politicians, but you don't see the people behind the scenes, like Patrick and